Marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today. Marriage, that blessed arrangement, that dream within a dream.
Hey, it's Firewalker, and today I wanted to discuss the myth that is the sanctity of marriage. This phrase has been plaguing discussions on premarital sex and same-sex marriage for ever, it seems. Or at least since Christianity and Judaism took over, anyways. The devout belief in the so-called sanctity of marriage has led to shaming, abuse, assault, murder, excommunication, etc., as well as denying people the right to marry. The main argument in the Christian community here in the US is that marriage is somehow sacred and an institution that God created, something that has to be kept pure, and defending the biblical ideals of marriage. But this is complete and utter bull. Part 1. Marriage is not a Jewish-created institution, a Christian-created institution, a Bible-created institution, or a God-created institution. According to When Did God Get Into the Wedding Business on Slate.com, civil unions probably predate religious marriage. Marriage developed independently in hundreds of human civilizations, so it's pretty difficult to pinpoint history's first marriage, or even the society that first conceived of marriage as an institution. Early Sumerian marriage agreements, which date to the 3rd millennium BC, are among the oldest records relating to marriage. The couples swore an oath to a series of deities in a small number of agreements, but most of the records contain no mention of gods or religion, suggesting that Sumerians viewed weddings as legal events. The terms of marriage were decidedly contractual, including specific worldly punishments for cheating. For instance, if the man cheated, he had to give 10 shekels in alimony to his wife. If the wife cheated, she would be strangled and dumped to the river. Totally fair. There's no indication that someone who violated the marriage agreement suffered the eternal wrath of Shamash or Marduk, or that those deities took a personal interest in strong marriages. On livescience.com, we see that actually the Catholic Church itself didn't really get involved in marriage until 1215 AD, and they decreed that partners had to publicly post notices of their marriage in a local parish. Still, until the 1500s, the church accepted a couple's word that they had exchanged marriage vows with no witnesses or corroborating evidence needed. Marriage.about.com also mentions that marriages took place without witness or ceremony or priest or anything until about the 1500s, actually 1563. Part 2, defending the biblical institution of marriage? Really? Let's take a look at exactly what the biblical institution of marriage looks like. Modern-day Christians like to say that marriage should be only one man and one woman and claim that the Bible actually supports this. But nowhere in the entire Bible have I ever found anything found anything to support that. Go ahead, I even actually did a search on an online Bible for sanctity of marriage in quotes, or sacredness of marriage or whatever, and I came up with nothing. I don't actually know where this phrase came from, where it originated, because it's not in the Bible. The phrase itself isn't anyways. Maybe the idea is, but certainly not one man and one woman. People like to say, well, God made Adam and Eve. Okay, well, let's take a look at the rest of the Bible, shall we? For instance, at the top left here, you see man and woman, like we typically hear about marriage being, as far as the sanctity of marriage goes. Then under that, we have man, woman, and concubine, which is a very basic model that we would see with like Solomon or David or any of the kings, really. So many concubines. Then we have man, woman, and woman slave, like we see in Abraham, Sarah with Hagar, whom Abraham impregnates and then throws out into the desert to die. Of course, then we have man and woman and woman and woman and woman and woman and woman, just multiple wives that we typically think about when we hear about polygamy, which most people these days seem to agree is relatively immoral. It's illegal in the US, presumably also in the UK. Not really ideal for marriage, doesn't seem very fair. It's also pretty famous for being in Mormonism, although the Mormon church also does not condone this to date. Then we have on the top right a woman and her brother-in-law should her husband die. In this case, the brother-in-law was supposed to impregnate this woman so that way she could bear children. Still, the children would be for the lineage of her previous husband. So that's just kind of weird. Next is the very famous "a woman must marry her rapist," because that sounds like a very healthy marriage. Yes, very sacred. Next, we have the female sex slaves as prisoner of war assigned to a male soldier who captured them, and then male and female slaves who could be assigned to each other and then had to have sex, had to submit to each other. So if the Christians really want to save the biblical ideal of marriage, I'm expecting to see a lot of these reoccurring in our society. I mean, if that's what they're really after, and if we really want to do what the Bible says. Speaking of, since we're doing the whole protecting the Bible thing, I'm expecting this to happen more as well. So don't push for saving or protecting the biblical ideals of marriage unless you really mean it. And if you do, that is an entire another subject that we're not going to talk about right now. And you should probably see a counselor. So if we don't believe that marriage began in Judaism or Christianity, and we don't believe that polygamy is acceptable, or a man, a woman, and concubines, multiple, or family members marrying like they did in the Old Testament, or sex slaves, or assigning slaves to be married together, and they would then have to have kids. Clearly, it doesn't make any sense to be against same-sex marriage, and if that's okay too, then what is the big deal about premarital sex anyway? That's something that I had to think about, and that I just simply didn't get. What was the big deal? If marriage doesn't seem so sacred, doesn't seem that protected to me, doesn't seem like that good of a thing in the Bible, and it's a more important thing, a better thing now. We don't have the arranged marriages in the first world countries like we saw in the Bible. It's more about love and intimacy and being together and being equals instead of owning the other person. Then why can't sex be a wonderful experience between you and somebody that you love? Also, in the Old Testament and biblical days, they had such a shorter life expectancy than we see now. Then it would kind of make sense for them to get married earlier. Because why would you wait to get married until you're 30 if you only lived to be 30? It doesn't give you any chance to do anything, really. It doesn't give you a chance to be together. And back then, the whole point of marriage and sex was procreation, was to have babies. In some parts, you actually could divorce a woman if she couldn't bear a child. And you see in the story of Rachel and Leah with Jacob, where the idea that a woman couldn't have a child because she had done something wrong, she had sinned, or God didn't love her, or didn't like her, or whatever. The whole point was children, to have as many of them as possible, because they were the heirs. Of course, as many of them, and many male children as possible anyways, because they were the heirs, because women couldn't have property. And so if it's just procreation, then it would also make sense that kids are getting married right when they hit puberty, which is simply not the case anymore. And yet the hormones are still there as we hit puberty that are pushing us, urging us to have sex, to procreate, to whatever, but it's not really logical for us now. It's not really the best practice now, or socially acceptable even. And so we get stuck for 10, 15 years with all the hormones and the sexual drives and nowhere to put it. And Christianity, masturbating is also bad. So is porn. So is premarital sex. But we're also frowned upon if we get married too early because we're making a stupid decision that we couldn't possibly know about love at such a young age or who we want to spend the rest of our lives with. It's a damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. And if people could be married in the eyes of the Lord, but not necessarily the state, and didn't have a license, which wasn't even a thing until Massachusetts, then what is the big deal about premarital sex, as long as it's consensual? I am a big supporter of sex still being a meaningful thing with somebody you really care about. I personally think it's better that way, but I'm not going to force my ideas on somebody else and say you can't have sex unless you love somebody. But at the same time, I don't accept people telling me that it's not okay for me to have premarital sex, because marriage is simply not that big of a deal. There is no sanctity of marriage. Marriage is not sacred. It is not a biblical institution, and as such, religious rules on when I can have sex do not apply. We have Firewalker. Thank you for watching my 5th video, I think. Free and honest why I left Christianity. I hope that you guys will comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the sanctity of marriage. Also, like, comment, rate, subscribe, share, all those good things. You can also find me on Facebook. The link is in the description, as well as the link to my new blog, The Phoenix Rising, where I just get a chance to talk about all the things I don't really have a chance to talk about on YouTube because it can be so time consuming. You'll also of course see the link to all of my sources that I've used to get all the information here. And so thank you guys so much for watching and for subscribing, and I will see you again next time.